He is the first of only two Kapitan Cina of Perak, of which the second and final one is his son. He is the man who is regarded as the leader of the Hai San secret society and is very much involved in the Larut Wars. And yet, his main home is right here in Georgetown, Penang. And in Georgetown, Penang, he has two roads named after him. Of course, I'm talking about Kapitan Cina Chung Keng Quee or Quee, which is the focus and profile that I'm doing today in this video. Fresh out of doing the video on Hai San Secret Society, I think it's just befitting that we continue on and learn about Chung Keng Quee. And for this video, I had the privilege of visiting his wonderful grand tomb over here in Mount Erskine, Penang. And for that, I have to thank Mr. Jeffrey Xiao, who is the great-grandson of Kapitan Chung Keng Quee, for providing me the details of the location and also providing me information on Chung Keng Quee. Of course, this, along with information that I have researched, is what forms today's video. This is what I understand up to this point today. Maybe I'm correct. Maybe there are instances where I am incorrect. I do not know. But this is as far as I know as of today. With history, we continue to learn. And tomorrow, I may learn something that contradicts what I learned today. But this is what I know of Chung Keng Quee, and it's my great pleasure to share this in this video with you as we continue to understand and appreciate our local history. In this Learn Penang Hokkien YouTube channel, I will be sharing a lot on local history, but this is not the only channel that I'm running. I have two other channels. The Chinese Civilization channel, where I will be creating videos on Chinese civilization and Chinese history, or the history of China, cities in China, and so on. And I have another channel called the Asian Civilizations channel, where I talk about the civilizations across Asia, outside of China and outside of our local history. So I can cover a lot of grounds, whether it is locally in Penang or in Malaysia, whether it is in China or it is outside of China and outside of Malaysia. Yes, I am passionate about history, and I hope that whatever I learn, I can share with you, and it will be very educational to you. And so we are going to dive in on Kapitan Cina Chung Keng Quee today, and we are going to start by visiting his tomb. Hi everybody, I'm at the Mount Erskine Cemetery here, and we are going to look for the tomb of Chung Keng Quee, the first Kapitan Cina of Perak, the leader of the Hai San, one of just two Kapitan Cinas of Perak. He is buried here in Penang. As you already know, Penang has one Kapitan Cina, which is Ko Lei Huan, but Perak has two, which is Chung Keng Quee and his son Chung Taiping. And so I have been told of the location of the tomb thanks to Chung Keng Quee's great-grandson Jeffrey Xiao, and with that we are able to visit the tomb. So come on over with me. Before we visit the tomb, I'll just pan around and show this is the tomb of another of Chung Keng Quee's son. I think this is not the other son, this is another one, but I will check later which son that is. And going this way, we are heading down towards the tomb of Chung Keng Quee. It is so grand, incredibly grand tomb. So I'm going this way now. I will do a longer video to show this on my Discover with Timothy YouTube channel, but this one for the Learn Penang Hokkien YouTube channel, I'll do a shorter one. And here we are. I'm heading down towards the tomb of Chung Keng Quee. As you can see, it is one of the grandest tombs in Penang, with a lot of statues guarding the tomb. And is this some form of dragon head here? You can see sort of dragon, isn't it? With a ball in his mouth. And then attendants. and the tomb itself. And just admire the carvings on the tomb. It's truly a grand tomb befitting the first Kapitan Cina of Perak, one of the wealthiest men in Penang at this time, the central figure in the Haisan secret society, the person that we read about in the Larut Wars. So here it is, his tomb here at Mount Erskine in Penang.
我叫郑金贵，很高兴欢迎大家观看这个视频。我创作这个视频是为了向大家讲述我生活中的一切。
Prologue: The Rise of a Teen King. In the bustling streets of 19th century Penang and the turbulent tin fields of Perak, one name echoes across both British officialdom and Chinese society alike: Chung Keng Quee. To some, he was a cunning leader of a secret society. To others, a brilliant entrepreneur who helped shape the fortunes of Malaya's tin mining industry. Born a Hakka immigrant from China, Chung Keng Quee would rise from humble beginnings to become Kapitan Cina of Perak, head of the powerful Haisan society, and one of the wealthiest Chinese merchants of his time. His life straddled two worlds, that of secret brotherhood and bloody wars, and that of opulent mansions, British honours, and philanthropic deeds. Yet behind the grandeur lay a complex legacy. His leadership in the violent Larut Wars left scars, while his later contributions helped build schools, temples, and community institutions that endure to this day. This is the story of Chung Keng Quee, a man who fought, negotiated, and prospered his way into history, leaving behind streets that bear his name and a home that still welcomes visitors long after his death. Let us now trace the life and legacy of this remarkable figure. Chapter 1: Roots in Zengcheng, a Hakka beginning. Long before the tin fields of Perak and the bustling streets of Penang ever knew his name, Chung Keng Quee was born in the district of Zhengcheng, located in Guangdong province in southern China. He was a Hakka, one of the many Chinese subgroups known for their resilience and pioneering spirit. The Hakkas, or guest people, had long been migrants even within China itself, moving from province to province in search of opportunity and survival. Zhengcheng, like much of Guangdong in the early 19th century, was a place of hardship. Population pressures, land scarcity, and political unrest pushed many young men, including Chung Keng Quee, to look beyond China's shores. Deals of wealth waiting to be made in Nanyang, the South Seas, as Southeast Asia was known, filled the imagination of these restless souls. Chung was likely still a boy when he left his ancestral village behind, traveling south to the port cities of Macau and Guangzhou, and eventually boarding a ship bound for the British trading port of Penang. Like countless other Chinese migrants, he carried little more than his hopes for a better life. What awaited him in Malaya was a land rich in tin but wracked with danger, where secret societies, British colonies, and Malay rulers vied for power. And in this volatile world, the young Hakka from Zhengcheng would one day carve out a place for himself at the top. Chapter 2: Arrival in Penang, a new beginning. When Chung Keng Quee stepped ashore in Penang in the mid-19th century, He was one of thousands of Chinese migrants seeking their fortune in the British trading settlement. Penang, founded in 1786, had become a thriving port city, a gateway between China and Southeast Asia, attracting traders, laborers, and fortune seekers from across the region. For young Chung, life in Penang was not easy. He likely arrived with little money, and like many Hakka newcomers, he sought work in the tin industry, one of the few paths open to Chinese migrants. The booming tin trade in nearby Perak had created a constant demand for miners, laborers, and middlemen. Starting as a small-time miner and trader, Chung slowly built connections with Penang's Chinese community. His Hakka roots drew him towards others from his homeland, and it was here that he encountered the network that would shape his destiny, the Hai San Secret Society. Originally formed as a mutual aid group, the Hai San had grown into a powerful organization that controlled much of the Chinese labor force involved in tin mining. Penang was more than just a place of opportunity. It was also a melting pot where Chinese secret societies, British colonial administrators, and Malay aristocrats intersected. Chung Keng Quee's time in Penang taught him two crucial lessons: the power of alliances and the importance of navigating between legal trade and the shadowy world of secret societies. With ambition, intelligence, and careful strategy, the young migrant was on the verge of a transformation. From these modest beginnings, Chung Keng Quee was preparing to ascend the ranks of the Hai San, and with it, the fortunes of the tin trade. Chapter 3: Rise within the Hai San, leader of the mountain. In the world of Chinese miners and merchants in 19th century Malaya, wealth and power were often built not only through business acumen, but through the secretive networks of Chinese brotherhoods. For Chung Keng Quee, the path to leadership lay within the Hai San Society, a powerful Hakka-dominated organization whose influence stretched from the streets of Penang to the tin-rich valleys of Perak. The Hai San was more than a typical secret society. It functioned as a protective brotherhood, a business consortium, and, when necessary, a military force. Known by its members as the Mountain, Shantang, the Hai San controlled Chinese labor and protected its interests against rivals. Chung, with his sharp mind and natural leadership skills, rose steadily through its ranks. His ascent was no accident. In an environment where trust and loyalty were paramount, Chung cultivated alliances with powerful figures in both Penang and Perak. His fluency in the unspoken code of the Brotherhood, combined with his expanding mining operations, earned him respect and influence. By the mid-19th century, he had become Shan Chu, leader of the mountain, effectively taking control of the entire Hai San network. Under his leadership, the Hai San expanded its grip over the tin mining districts of Larut, forming an organized and disciplined force of miners who also acted as loyal enforcers when disputes erupted. Chung's role as both a businessman and secret society leader gave him dual power. He could negotiate in the halls of British administration, yet command loyalty in the underworld of secret brotherhoods. But with great power came great rivalry. The Hai San's growing dominance inevitably drew the ire of their principal enemies, the Gihin Society, whose Cantonese membership contested control of tin mining regions. Chung Keng Quee now stood at the center of a brewing storm, one that would soon plunge the tin fields of Perak into open war. To be clear, The Gihin society is a multi-dialect society made up of Hokkiens, Teochews, Cantonese, and Hakkas to a lesser extent. In Penang and Singapore, its membership leaned heavily towards Hokkien and Teochew. In Perak, however, the situation was more mixed. In the Larut region, Cantonese faction within Gihin was significant, particularly among miners. It's these Cantonese elements who formed the primary rivals of the Hakka-led Haisan under Chung Keng Quee. This doesn't mean the entire Gihin was Cantonese in Larut. Rather, the Cantonese were a key segment within the local Gihin forces contesting Haisan control over tin mines. In contrast, the Haisan society was more exclusively Hakka, especially in Perak. It is true to say that the Haisan originated as a Cantonese-dominated secret society, especially in its early phases and in places like Penang and Singapore. However, in Perak, particularly in the Larut tin mining areas, the Haisan came to be dominated by Hakka members, especially under the leadership of Chung Keng Quee, who was himself Hakka. Leadership roles, particularly when tied to tin mining, became concentrated in the hands of Hakka leaders like Chung, who now stood at the center of a brewing storm, one that would soon plunge the tin fields of Perak into open war. Chapter 4: Control over Larut's tin fields. By the mid-19th century, the tin-rich district of Larut in Perak had become the epicenter of wealth and conflict in the Malay Peninsula. With its dense forests and mineral-rich hills, Larut attracted thousands of Chinese miners, most of them members of rival secret societies. At the heart of this contested land stood Chung Keng Quee, now the undisputed leader of the Haisan society. Chung's rise coincided with the growing influence of two Malay leaders, Long Jafar, the local chieftain credited with discovering tin in Larut, and his son and successor, Nga Ibrahim. Both men relied on Chinese miners to extract tin, and Chung Keng Quee, representing the Haisan, positioned himself as their essential partner. Through diplomacy, resource control, and sheer manpower, Chung extended his influence deep into Larut's mining territories. The Haisan under Chung's command operated almost like a state within a state. They controlled labor recruitment, managed supply chains, and enforced order within their ranks. Armed miners loyal to the Haisan safeguarded the society's interests, and profits flowed into the coffers of both the society and its leader. However, Chung's dominance was constantly challenged by the Gihin society. Composed largely of Cantonese miners, the Gihin saw themselves as rightful contenders for Larut's riches. Clashes between Haisan and Gihin factions grew frequent, with disputes over mining land, laborers, and toll collections escalating into violence. Chung Keng Quee's reputation as both a negotiator and a warlord took shape during this period. He walked a fine line, managing relationships with Malay authorities and British officials while maintaining control over a vast, often volatile Chinese workforce. His leadership transformed Larut into a Haisan stronghold, but this dominance often intensified rivalries. The stage was now set for a much larger confrontation, one that would engulf Larut in years of bloodshed and reshape the political landscape of Perak. Chapter 5: The Larut Wars begin. By the early 1870s, the rivalry between the Haisan and Gihin societies in Larut had reached a boiling point. The tin fields, once a symbol of prosperity, became battlegrounds where thousands of miners took up arms for their respective factions. At the heart of this escalating conflict stood Chung Keng Quee, the undisputed leader of the Haisan. The so-called Larut Wars were not isolated skirmishes. They were full-scale conflicts that drew in thousands of fighters with weapons ranging from traditional swords and spears to imported firearms. The trigger was often deceptively simple: a dispute over mining land, unpaid debts, or perceived insults. But behind each confrontation was a deeper struggle for control over Larut's lucrative tin resources. As leader of the Haisan, Chung Keng Quee was both strategist and warlord. He mobilized his forces, fortified strongholds, and coordinated supply lines from Penang to the front lines in Perak. The Haisan, under his command, operated like a private army. British observers at the time described the society as a state within a state. The Gihin, meanwhile, launched their own offensives, determined to wrest control of Larut from Haisan domination. What followed were waves of violence, with entire mining settlements attacked and burned. The civilian toll was heavy. Not only Chinese miners but also Malay villagers caught in the crossfire. Despite the brutality, Chung maintained a pragmatic approach. He sought when possible to negotiate through intermediaries, even as he prepared for battle. His ability to lead both in warfare and in diplomacy distinguished him from mere gang leaders. Yet, even he could not prevent the escalation that would soon paralyze Larut's mining economy. As the fighting intensified, the conflict in Larut was no longer a secret society dispute. It had become a civil war. And the British colonial government, watching its economic interests threatened, could no longer remain on the sidelines. The Larut Wars had begun in earnest, and for Chung Keng Quee, the most dangerous chapter of his career had just opened. Chapter 6: The Bloodshed of 1871 to 1873. Between 1871 and 1873, the Larut Wars reached their bloodiest phase. What had begun as sporadic skirmishes between the Haisan and Gihin societies now escalated into near-continuous warfare across the tin-rich lands of Larut. At the center of this conflict was Chung Keng Quee, commanding his Haisan forces with ruthless efficiency. Entire settlements were fortified or razed to the ground. Armed miners, numbering in the thousands, fought not only with swords and spears, but also with muskets and cannons smuggled in from Penang. The Haisan, under Chung's leadership, controlled much of Larut's interior, but the Gihin mounted relentless assaults to break their dominance. Battles often lasted for days, with high casualties on both sides. One of the bloodiest encounters occurred during this period as both sides fought for control of the vital tin mining town of Kamunting. Reports describe the terrain littered with corpses, while survivors sought refuge in fortified forts and fled to nearby towns. Chung Keng Quee coordinated defense campaigns from his stronghold, ordering supply convoys and reinforcements from Penang to sustain his fighters. His role as both tactician and financier proved critical. However, the conflict went beyond secret societies. Malay chiefs, including Nga Ibrahim, found themselves dragged into the fighting, forced to choose sides or attempt mediation. The economic consequences were devastating. Tin production ground to a halt, and trade in Penang and Perak suffered severe disruption. By 1873, the scale of violence was too great to ignore. British merchants, seeing their profits vanish, demanded intervention. The British colonial government, which had long maintained a policy of non-interference in Perak's internal affairs, now found itself pressured to act. The tin mines of Larut were too valuable to be left in chaos. For Chung Keng Quee, the war was both a fight for survival and a test of leadership. Though determined to maintain Hai-san dominance, he also understood the war could not continue indefinitely. His network of contacts in Penang, including British officials and influential Chinese merchants, would soon play a crucial role. As the fires of war burned across Larut, negotiations were already underway behind closed doors. A new chapter in Malaya's history was about to unfold, one that would involve not just secret societies and Malay rulers, but also British gunboats and treaties. Chapter 7: British Intervention and the Pangkor Treaty. By 1873, the violence in Larut had spiraled out of control. The brutal conflict between the Hai-san and Gihin societies crippled tin production and disrupted trade throughout Perak and Penang. The British, whose profits depended on a steady flow of tin, could no longer stand aside. Calls from merchants and administrators alike demanded action. For Chung Keng Quee, this intervention marked both a threat and an opportunity. In early 1874, British forces intervened militarily, landing troops in Perak to impose order and protect their economic interest. At the same time, British officials sought a diplomatic solution to the broader chaos in Perak, which involved not only Chinese factions but also disputes among Malay chiefs over the Perak throne. Recognizing Chung Keng Quee's pivotal role as leader of the Hai-san, the British brought him to the negotiating table. His leadership and control over thousands of miners made him indispensable to any lasting peace. He participated in discussions that culminated in the Pangkor engagement, signed aboard HMS Pluto off the island of Pangkor in January 1874. This treaty marked a turning point in Perak's history. Malay political disputes were resolved, with Raja Abdullah recognized as Sultan of Perak under British guidance. British colonial authority was formalized with the appointment of a British resident to oversee state affairs. And importantly, Chinese secret societies, including the Hai-san and Gihin, were ordered to cease hostilities and respect the new order. For Chung Keng Quee, the Pangkor Treaty was a diplomatic victory. His role in helping to end the Larut Wars earned him favor with the British. Rather than being punished as a gang leader, he was recognized as a community leader and a stabilizing force. The British rewarded Chung's cooperation by appointing him Kapitan Cina of Perak, making him the official head of the Chinese community, a title that would cement his authority and legitimate his leadership. The Larut Wars had ended not on the battlefield, but on the negotiating table, where Chung Keng Quee emerged as both survivor and victor. Chapter 8: Kapitan Cina of Perak. Following the Pangkor Treaty of 1874, the British sought stability in Perak, recognizing that Chinese tin miners were essential for the colony's prosperity. To manage the Chinese community, they turned to the man who had already proved himself a leader in both war and negotiation, Chung Keng Quee. In recognition of his influence and loyalty, Chung was formally appointed Kapitan Cina of Perak, the official head of the Chinese community in the state. As Kapitan Cina, Chung served as both a mediator and intermediary between the British colonial administration and the Chinese population, particularly the vast network of tin miners who looked to him for leadership. Unlike in Malacca, where multiple capitans had served over time, Perak's history of the title was far more exclusive. In fact, throughout Perak's history, there were only 2 Kapitan Cina ever appointed. First, Chung Keng Quee himself, and later his son Chung Taiping, who would become the second and last Kapitan Cina of Perak, and indeed the final Kapitan Cina appointed in all of British Malaya. As Kapitan Cina, Chung's responsibilities were extensive. He helped enforce order among the Chinese miners, mediated disputes, and represented Chinese interests in dealing with British officials. Yet his role also symbolized the shifting dynamics of power. The British, wary of secret societies, yet dependent on Chinese labor, used Chung's leadership to stabilize Perak's mining industry while quietly working to dismantle the influence of organizations like the Hai San. For Chung Keng Quee, the title of Kapitan Cina legitimized what he had previously commanded through strength and loyalty alone. From a once impoverished Hakka migrant, he had risen to become the officially recognized leader of one of Malaysia's richest states. But while his power was now secure, the world around him was changing. The days of secret society dominance were coming to an end, and the British colonial system was tightening its grip on Perak. Chapter 9: Life in Penang and Accumulation of Wealth. Though officially Kapitan Cina of Perak, Chung Keng Quee chose to base much of his personal and business interests in Penang. From this vibrant British port city, he oversaw his extensive tin mining interests in Perak while expanding his commercial empire. Penang in the late 19th century was a city of opportunity, and Chung seized it fully. He invested heavily in property, tin smelting, and commerce, becoming one of the wealthiest Chinese tycoons in the region. His reputation shifted from secret society leader to respected merchant and community figure. His wealth was displayed in the grand homes he built. The most famous was Hai Ki Chan, a lavish mansion along Penang's Church Street. Built in the traditional Straits Chinese style, it featured intricate woodwork, imported tiles, and opulent furnishings, reflecting both Chinese craftsmanship and European taste. This house, a symbol of Chung's success, still stands today as the Pinang Peranakan Mansion, visited by thousands of tourists each year. Chung Keng Quee was not merely a figure of luxury. He continued to manage his tin mining business with remarkable efficiency. His mines in Larut, centered around Taiping, produced vast quantities of tin ore, feeding Penang's export trade. His influence extended through Chinese business networks, and he maintained strong relationships with both British officials and Penang's merchant elite. His transformation was complete. Once a warlord of the Larut tin fields, Chung was now seen as a pillar of the Chinese community in Penang. Yet, beneath the image of respectability, his ties to the old world of secret societies still lingered in memory. In the late 19th century, Chung Keng Quee stood at the pinnacle of success, but his focus was shifting toward community building, philanthropy, and preparing the next generation to inherit his legacy. Chapter 10: Community Contributions and Legacy Projects. With his fortune secured and his position as Kapitan Cina of Perak established, Chung Keng Quee turned increasingly to philanthropy and community leadership. His story was no longer just one of personal wealth, but of contributions that would shape the Chinese community of Malaya for generations to come. In Penang, where he spent much of his later life, Chung supported the establishment of schools, clan associations, and religious institutions. He contributed generously to Chinese temples, including those dedicated to Guangdi and other traditional deities revered by the Hakka community. His wealth funded not only religious buildings, but also social organizations that provided support to new immigrants arriving from China. Among his most notable contributions was his role in strengthening Hakka identity in Penang and Perak. He sponsored clan halls and mutual aid societies where Hakka migrants could find assistance, employment connections, and social solidarity. In this way, Chung Keng Quee became not just a leader of the High Sant, but a patriarchal figure to countless Hakka settlers. Beyond the Hakka community, his philanthropy extended to wider Chinese society. He was known for donating to disaster relief efforts, contributing to the maintenance of cemeteries, and supporting cultural festivals. His efforts helped to elevate the standing of the Chinese community in the eyes of the British colonial authorities, who saw him as a stabilizing force. Chung also invested in infrastructure related to the tin industry. His capital supported mining operations, smelting facilities, and logistical networks connecting Perak's interior with Penang's port. Through these investments, he not only enriched himself but also contributed to the broader economic development of Malaya. By the late 19th century, Chung Keng Quee had shifted his focus from conflict to community. Though once a secret society leader commanding armed miners, he was now widely respected as a philanthropist and builder of institutions. But even as he enjoyed the fruits of his success, age and the shifting tides of colonial policy signaled that his era was coming to an end. Chapter 11: Later Years and Decline of Power. As the 19th century drew to a close, Chung Keng Quee began to withdraw from active leadership. Though still Kapitan Cina of Perak and a prominent figure in Penang society, the landscape that had once allowed secret societies to flourish was now rapidly changing. The British colonial administration, having consolidated control over Perak and much of the Malay Peninsula, took deliberate steps to suppress the power of secret societies like the High Sant and Gihin. The Society's Ordinance of 1889 aimed to outlaw these organizations, labeled them threats to public order. While the High Sant's formal power structure dissolved, its networks persisted quietly within the fabric of Chinese business and community life. For Chung Keng Quee, this transition was both inevitable and pragmatic. Having spent decades navigating between the worlds of secret societies and colonial politics, he adapted once again, retreating from overt political leadership while maintaining his business interests and social influence. In Penang, his life took on the character of a wealthy patriarch. He presided over family affairs, expanded his properties, and focused on his role as a community elder. His wealth remained vast, with extensive holdings in tin mining, property, and trade. His later years also saw the emergence of his son, Chung Taiping. Educated and groomed for leadership, Chung Taiping inherited both his father's fortune and his public role. Upon Chung Keng Quee's eventual retirement from formal duties, his son was appointed Kapitan Cina of Perak, becoming the second and last Kapitan Cina not only of Perak but in all of British Malaya. As he aged, Chung Keng Quee watched the world he once ruled transformed. The age of warlords and secret society dominance was ending, replaced by colonial governance and commercial modernity. Yet, in Penang and Perak, the name Chung Keng Quee still commanded respect. By the dawn of the 20th century, his life of battles, bargains, and business was drawing to a close. Chapter 12: Death and Legacy. In 1901, after decades of shaping the fortunes of Perak and Penang, Chung Keng Quee passed away. His death marked the end of an era, a life that has spanned the tumultuous days of the Larut Wars, the rise of the British colonial state, and the transformation of Chinese secret societies into legitimate businesses and community organizations. His funeral in Penang was a major event, attended by Chinese leaders, British officials, and ordinary citizens alike. For many, Chung represented not just a man, but a symbol, the immigrant who rose from poverty to power, who had fought, negotiated, and eventually led his community with vision and authority. Yet Chung Keng Quee's legacy did not vanish with his passing. In Penang, 2 streets today still bear his name. Akwi Street, named after his popular nickname Akwi, and Keng Quee Street, preserving his full given name. These streets, located in the heart of Georgetown, serve as daily reminders of the influence he once wielded. Perhaps the most tangible link to his life is his former mansion on Church Street, known as Hai Ki Chan during his lifetime. Today, this grand house stands as the Pinang Peranakan Mansion, a museum dedicated to Straits Chinese culture, visited by thousands of tourists every year. Once a private residence showcasing his wealth and status, it now preserves the memory of Penang's Chinese heritage, including the story of Chung Keng Quee himself. In Perak, his contributions are less visible but equally profound. The mining towns of Taiping and Kamunting, where he once commanded thousands of miners, owed much of their early growth to the tin mining industry he helped develop. Meanwhile, his son Chung Taiping carried on the family name, becoming the last Kapitan Cina of Perak and of British Malaya, bridging the transition from the world of secret societies to that of modern commerce and governance. In the end, Chung Keng Quee's life embodies both controversy and admiration, a man remembered as a warlord and a philanthropist, a secret society leader and a community builder. Epilogue: a legacy written in tin and stone. The story of Chung Keng Quee is one of contrast. He was both a leader of the Hai San Secret Society and a respected merchant celebrated by the British. He waged wars in the tin fields of Larut, yet funded schools, temples, and charitable causes in Penang. His life was marked by conflict, but his legacy rests in prosperity. From his humble beginnings as a Hakka migrant from Zengcheng, Chung rose to control vast tin mining operations, amass personal wealth, and influence the course of history in Perak and Penang. His story reflects the broader experience of Chinese migrants in 19th century Malaya, people who carved opportunity from hardship, shaped industries, and built communities that endured to this day. Though the world of Chinese secret societies faded with the tightening grip of colonial rule, Chung Keng Quee's name survived. His former home, the Pinang Peranakan Mansion, welcomed visitors daily, while Aqui Street and Keng Quee Street bustled with life in the very city where he once walked. In the end, Chung's life defies easy categorization. He was neither hero nor villain, but a complex figure of his time. A miner, a strategist, a leader, and a patriarch. His legacy, written in the streets of Georgetown and the histories of Perak steam fields, remains an inseparable part of Malaysia's Chinese heritage. Chung Keng Quee's story is over, but his influence still lingers in stone, in memory, and in the streets that carry his name.